So, Alexander Hamilton, Breakfast at Tiffany's, Sex and the City, most of Woody Allen's filmography, Spider-Man, or even Penguins of Madagascar. What's their common element? I welcome you to my presentation, The Problem with the Greatest City in the World and How New York Proved the Absurdity of Racism. It is the presentation based on my experiences while being in New York in August. It's been my first time in the United States and obviously first time in New York. And the stories that I will be telling are from my experiences of, for example, parts of my family that are the residents of New York, or just the stories that I've read to prepare myself for the trip. Some of these photos, such as like this, are mine because I do photography, and they're gonna spontaneously appear in the presentation. So, roughly 2,030 films were shot on the streets of New York, and that's the thing I've counted myself on the Wikipedia page. And about 40,000 advertisements, episodes of TV series, and movies are shot in New York a year. Why this is important? The New York as a city has a very strong image in pop culture, and it influences, whether we like it or not, our perception of the city of New York. So, hands up, who likes the New York? Who thinks that it's the city that's for him? Whether he's been there or not, this is pretty important. Because I feel like most of people who I talked with after my stay in New York have heard this, but New York fans are kind of like fans of horses. They stink, they are dangerous, and they're expensive as hell. So, and this is something that was fantastically portrayed in the song by Grzegorz Turnau, I've been to New York, in my own amateur translation, so you have to forgive me for that, but it goes like this. So, I've been to New York, I've stood in New York. The way I stand right now, that's how I stood in New York. Then I get tired. I don't know how it was in New York. But I'm telling you, go to New York. Stand and sit, because it's not worth not visiting New York. I think that's a very good point. So, what is actually wrong with the city? Because that's the title of my presentation. Well, bunch of reasons. First chapter, so first bunch of reasons is overpopulation. And this isn't something that should surprise us because, well, it's the biggest Western metropolis in the world, and therefore it has a bunch of reasons related to the amount of people that are staying there. First of all, homelessness. And this is something I've seen for myself, and I'm 100% sure all of you have as well. Homeless people are everywhere in New York, and that's because New York is a type of city called sanctuary city. So this is a type of city in the US that the city government is forced to serve you with accommodation and is restricted to kick you out of the city. With accommodation, there is a lot of problems, so that's the effect. The result, one of the 10 most dangerous cities in the world and the most dangerous city in the United States. Furthermore, as I've said already, it's huge, and just for scale, if Brooklyn was a separate state, it would have been the third in population, the biggest state in the United States, right after the rest of New York and Los Angeles. So that might give you an impression how big this actually is. Second chapter, Cash Rules Everything Around Me. A song by Wu-Tang Clan from Staten Island, by the way, here. And this is actually true, and this is very something that is far from my preferences, because New York is, because of the amount of people, it's expensive as hell, 5th most expensive city in the world, and well, it's something that we experience as tourists while being for 2 weeks, 3 weeks in the city, but for the longer period of time, it creates many problems, such as the thing called New York hustle. And for those of you who don't know, New York hustle is a type of work culture that New York specializes itself in, and it's a type of culture in corporations, so in all bank firms, law firms, everything like this, huge corporations, where people just want to stay afloat and don't get consumed by the skyrocket prices of living in New York. That ends with, for example, 12, 14-hour a day work days. So this is pretty personal, because I'm someone who doesn't like the competitiveness at all, and it just turns me off instantly when I see the competition. But I assume it is not probably the most healthy environment for work, and those corporations I'm talking about are one of the biggest employers in New York City, and yeah, so it's pretty significant. So yeah, most of us imagine working in New York like this, but it usually ends with this. And this is perfectly portrayed by one of the former workers in New York, who then was working for a couple of months in Paris. In New York City, before COVID, everyone was working a ton and bragging about it like it was their favorite coping mechanism. I guess we all know that. Now it's chilled out, people are tired and very much over their work, which feels more like French, except the French actually get holidays, sick days, and healthcare to help them live better, non-work-centered lives. That's just pretty sad. The third chapter is hygiene, and it gets pretty severe, as we all know, in such city, mainly because, okay, that was rather unexpected. Rats, yeah, that is a fact, and rats are everywhere, and yeah, you can see them at every step, no matter whether you're in the underground, at Central Park, or just at the streets. The fact that rats have their own Wikipedia page says something. That's caused mainly by, again, coming back to the matter of overpopulation, 26,000 people per square meter, which is doubled through the workday by tourists and by commuters. So yeah, it is a crowded city, and it meets a lot of problems. So, hands up who still likes New York City. So what is with the New York City at the end? Because I kind of forgot to mention it at the beginning, but New York is still one of the most interesting cities I've ever been to, and one of the most incredible places I would definitely love to return to. So what's about us at the end? I may have now even a harder job convincing you that is actually a city worth visiting, or just worth respecting as a city. So, first of all, it's the center of the world in terms of art, in terms of business, but as we stated, that doesn't really interest us. But it's just one of the cities in the world that everything revolves around. And yeah, it's well, New York is like an experiment. It's the biggest Western metropolis in the world. So extraordinary problems, extraordinary consequences. So yeah, and there, in terms of scale, there isn't much cities we could compare New York to. So it's pretty exceptional. I would say that the closest one would be Hong Kong, in terms of the density, in terms of the pace of the everyday life there. But there is one important thing. New York is way more diversified in terms of the ethnic and national minorities, which gets pretty interesting. That's why we move on to the next chapter, because this is pretty exceptional. About 800 languages and dialects are spoken in New York, and around 40% of the citizens of New York are not American. So yeah, we have a huge diversity with a long tradition of over 200 years. And yeah, every part of the city has their own, every part of the city, maybe another way around. Every minority has their own part of the city. For example, in Manhattan, there's Chinatown. I don't know, in Williamsburg, it's the Jewish district. Greenpoint, also a part of Brooklyn, is Polish. There's Little Italy, Little Korea, and so on and so on. So now I would like to tell you a little story about one of the districts of Brooklyn, which is called Crown Heights. And it's my own experience, pretty close to where I lived, because it was in Fort Greene, somewhere around here. So I had plenty of time to discover the part of the city and to read about it a bit, because just as most of the districts in New York, Crown Heights is inhabited by some of the ethnic minorities. And well, it didn't have enough luck to be divided by the Orthodox Jews and the Caribbean minority. So that wasn't a particularly good idea, because if you think about it, these people have nothing in common. Language, tradition, history, culture, the type of clothes they wear, and so on and so on. So especially at the end of the 20th century, you could feel physically the tensions between the two communities in the district. So at the beginning of the 90s, you could say that the district was just waiting for a spark. And the spark came. Around 8 p.m., Monday, August 19th, 1991. The sun was slowly setting in the Crown Heights. People were returning to their homes after workday. Seems like the whole district was lazily preparing for evening and then setting for sleep. You could hear a couple of children playing next to Utica Avenue, one of the major Brooklyn avenues. Out of the sudden, a car crossed the avenue on the red light and hit another car in the crossing. The first car veered onto the sidewalk and knocked a 300-kilogram stone pillar. Then it smashed an iron gate. And between the car and the gate, there were two children. One, heavily injured, was sent to the hospital when the ambulance arrived 3 minutes later. The other one died on the spot. The second child was Gavin Caddo, a 7-year-old son of Guyanese immigrants. The driver was a Jew named Yosef Lifish. Yosef was a driver in a motorcade of Menachem Mendel Shearson, one of the most respected New York rabbis. The reaction of the committee was immediate. Right after the death of Gavin, massive protests broke out in Crown Heights. Jewish stores were robbed, their cars and houses attacked by the Caribbean minority. Jews were assaulted on the streets. For 3 days, a small district of Brooklyn became the hell on earth. The civil unrest in the following days took one more person. Yankel Rosenbaum, a 29-year-old Jewish student, beaten to death. So, the Crown Heights experienced a tragedy, which about you could hear in the whole New York and even in the whole United States. But the city government, the mayor of New York, the mayor of Brooklyn, had understood what is happening in the longer perspective and started to work immediately. So just after the riots have ended, the mediations began, facilitated by the city government, and a lot of intercultural projects were revoked, and the education programs were launched in high schools. There was even a Q&A host in the public park when the leaders of the two minorities could answer the questions from the audience, what is the difference between their cultures. And it feels like the Crown Heights riots, which have consumed 2 lives, had to serve as a turning point to the whole community of both Jews and Caribbeans to see what is really at stake, and it's the peace of having a normal life. And after that, fortunately, the tensions softened, and from being one of the most dangerous areas in the whole New York, for example, outnumbering the Harlem in the criminal statistics, it became one of the most peaceful areas in the whole Brooklyn. So, and in the whole New York in general. So that is probably the point of my speech. The New York is, because of the huge diversity in the city, okay, epilogue, next chapter. New York, because of the huge diversity in the city, is like planet Earth. And it is basically the whole international community condensed into a 4 or 8 million inhabitants city. And I would say that this is the biggest problem with the greatest city in the world, because I don't know if it's the greatest one, but I'm sure that's one of the greatest, and how we perceive it. And I see that as completely inadequate, taking into consideration with how huge precedent are we looking into as people who live here. And well, it is often stated that, or that's the common information among us, that, oh, New York is such a liberal city. Yes, but it's not a liberal city because it has, for example, a mayor which is blue, democratic, but because of the reason for that is people who are living in New York are experiencing so many cultures that nothing could really surprise them in terms of the diversity of people, because the fact that they're raised in contact with so many cultures, it gives them a certain margin how they perceive different people and what sense of the being different they have. And well, in Polish we have a saying that reading cures fascism and traveling cures racism, and yeah, I see that very, very adequate, because 2 groups from 2 different sides of the globe, the Caribbeans and the Middle East, can live in peace and coexist in the area of respect. The groups that, as I've stated earlier, have nothing, literally nothing in common, but they live in peace. And that means there isn't so much between us after all. And if those 2 groups can coexist in peace, that means we all can. Thank you. Okay.